Okay, so our unit was Unit E1, which was Gender, Justice, and Environmental Issues. And then these are some photos highlighting that. And this is going to be by Yasmin and Holly. So what we will cover is the author, a movement of housewives, male-dominated groups, women in environmental politics, and ecofeminism. So our author is Robert Gottlieb. He was an editor-in-chief for Simon & Schuster, Alfred A. Knopf, and The New Yorker. He was born April 29, 1931, which makes him 90 years old and a Taurus. He has written and edited a variety of books on environmentalism, dance, religion, nonfiction works, biographies. And like a fun fact is he was the editor that discovered Catch-22. And currently he writes articles for the New York Times. And the chapter that we'll be focusing on is chapter 6 of Forcing the Spring, which is about gender and justice. Okay, so movement of housewives, it was the beginning of women in leadership, especially in the environmental movement. And some of the issues they focused on within the environmental movement were community development, the effects of environmental issues on their children, and also accessing their own power.
So this was significant as it showed the different perspectives and strategies in addressing environmental issues, and how they went about like advertising their concern for issues like Love Canal. It highlighted how women saw place as a sense of community and men saw it as this financial asset. It also Gottlieb credits their maternal nature to their success, which I find interesting, and sort of states that they have to be good home carers to, sorry. It also spoke about the change in gender roles and how it pushed for men to adjust as the women weren't at home as much. So that was also an important thing.
Okay, so next section was male-dominated groups. So groups like the Sierra Club were mainly male membership, which kind of showed how women weren't involved too much in the environmental movement at first. And the club, the Boone and Crockett Club, was founded by Theodore Roosevelt, and it was actually a male-only organization that was just about hunting and like establishing men in nature. And then it also examined the Boy Scouts versus the Girl Scouts, which, as you can see, like the Boy Scouts were kind of more about wilderness and just survival and kind of like how man interacts in nature, whereas the Girl Scouts began as a movement of like making cookies and focusing how to be good housewives and stuff like that.
So this is significant as it sort of shows how the Boy Scouts was established as it was sort of like this cry to reclaim the environment as well as their manhood. They aimed to protect American forests as it was a claim to their manhood in this time where gender roles were becoming more fluid. And the Sierra Club, it sort of showed how there was a mutual goal, yet they rejected people like Cora Tucker because of their prejudices. And it suggests how that prejudices need to be removed before action is taken. And it showed that there was a priority over that, even though they did have that mutual goal.
Okay, and then next would be women in environmental politics. So as women were starting to become more involved in the environmental movement, things like abortion and childcare were also becoming more prevalent because environmental politics were targeting women more, and women were also making their voices known. So some of the significant or like important female figures were Lois Dunlap, who is the only one pictured there because it's the only picture I could find. Cynthia Wilson of Friends of the Earth, and Janet Brown of the Environmental Defense Fund, all of which were some of the first women in their respective groups.
This was important to note as it showed how the environmental movement was politicized and began to start including everyone and not only male voices. It highlighted how there was a separation in feminist roles. One had a sentimental approach and one had a business approach. It also showed how they brought women into the environmental movement by using abortion, and just how they were influenced. And on zero population growth, it showed how it seeked out professional women, so not like housewives, and how this had a significant backlash as they saw women as the only one who were like the parents, and they didn't like include men in this, so women were obviously not very happy with this.
Okay, and then the last section is ecofeminism, which, as it was first defined, was an ecological revolution to overthrow all the social structures of domination. So obviously a very like radical and extreme approach. And it's now defined as a branch of feminism that examines the connections between women and nature. So it's kind of taken more of a socialist kind of perspective that has like brought it back so more people are included in the movement. Some of the first women marches were against the Pentagon, which is pictured as feminist for animal liberation, and it just like shows how women were starting to gain their voice. And it also examines the differences between the radical and feminist, or sorry, radical versus socialist feminism movement.
So obviously this was important because it was a collaboration between two social movements, which actually later turned to a separation between two different sides of feminism. So the socialist and then radical, which were these two extreme ways of like gaining attention. So one would appeal to sentiment, and one would try to appeal to logic.